Alright, here it is, my complete disassembly and reassembly video of the SIG Sauer P365. Let's get started. Before I get started, I just want to take a quick second to thank everybody that has liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate it, and I hope you find these videos helpful. If you haven't subscribed, you can find a subscribe button right down here in the corner. If you could smash that baby, I'd really appreciate it. A couple different reasons. The more subscribers YouTubers have, the more our content gets shared. Right now, 2A's under attack more so than ever, so we need all the help that we can get. Also, when I post new content, you get notified right away. So, again, thank you everybody that has liked and subscribed to my YouTube channel. I really appreciate it. All right, so you're either sitting there itching, chomping at the bit, got anxiety, you want to get in there and rip this thing apart and clean it all up and put it back together, or you're sitting there scratching your head, asking yourself, why the heck would anybody want to completely disassemble their P365? Well, I can think of three reasons. Reason number one, maybe you bought new upgrades, new triggers, new sights, new mag release. You want to change that stuff out yourself. Personally, I would rather do it myself. That way I can save money and buy more upgrades and more guns. Stuff's pretty straightforward and easy to do, so why not? Secondly, even the manufacturer has an interval for a lot of these parts that they want replaced. Okay? Some are 20,000 rounds, some are 10,000 rounds, some are 5,000 rounds. Okay? So a lot of the stuff's in your owner's manual, can be found online, but it's $85 to send that into SIG plus $55 shipping, when you could probably do it for a third of the cost yourself. Thirdly, maybe you got a lot of rounds on your gun. Field stripping it and cleaning it that way just isn't getting it cleaned as much as you want it. So removing all those parts and pieces is going to allow you to clean everything perfect, spick and span, lube it all up, put it all back together. It'll actually be in better condition than you received it when it's brand new. So moving on, let's talk about the tools and the stuff you're going to need to completely disassemble your 365. All right, so as always, I highly encourage watching the video from the very beginning to the very end. That way you can decide if this is something you're comfortable doing. You don't want to get halfway into this and then realize you're over your head and can't reassemble your pistol. Secondly, that way if I forgot a tool here, you won't be unprepared if you do decide to do this. So you don't need all of this stuff. Example is the armorer's block. A lot of people use a roll of painter's tape to substitute for that. I have a small hammer, nylon head on one side, brass head on the other side. Two different picks, straight and 90 degree, a couple different punches, a couple different sizes. I got my pin removal tool that I sell on my website, sigguy.com. This is for the 365. It removes the pin from the grip module so you can get the fire control unit out. On the website, there's different sizes and different colors to choose from. A small pair of needle nose pliers. And then once we get into the sights, I use the Wheeler sight pusher. Okay. I know you guys are like, dude, you talk way too much. All right. Let's get started disassembling the 365. First thing we always do when working on firearms is make sure we are working on a safe firearm. So we're going to remove our magazine, and my rule on my bench is never any magazines and never any loaded magazines, never any ammunition on my bench. So we're going to lock our slide to the rear. We're going to physically and visually check to make sure there's no round in the chamber, which there's not. Look through the mag well, inspect the breech face. We are completely safe. So I'm going to rotate my takedown lever to about the 6 o'clock position and release my slide. We're going to be working on the upper first here. Mine may look different than yours. Mine has an optic plate. Yours might not have an optic plate and looks like this. We can see a little hole here in the top. Whatever the case may be, the procedure is going to be exactly the same for you, minus additional steps that I might have to do to like remove my optic plate, or if you got a red dot. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is remove our guide rod assembly. And this is nothing new. This is just like cleaning your pistol. We're going to remove our barrel, set that aside, and now we have a slide with our striker, our back plate, and our extractor installed in it. So the first thing we're going to do is remove our extractor for whatever the case may be. Maybe you broke it, maybe it's just weak, it's not extracting, you're having malfunctions, whatever the case may be. We're going to use, on mine, I have a T15 to remove these Torx screws on the top. Just going to remove 2 of those. And this is going to give me access to that roll pin for my extractor. And there you go. There's my roll pin right there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to drift out this roll pin. You can go either from the top to the bottom or from the bottom to the top. It doesn't matter. It can go either way. I'm going to go from the top to the bottom on mine. And then this is where you're going to need your armorer's block or your roll of painter's tape. So I'm just going to set that on there like that. And this punch here is a 5/64. The 3/32 fits through the hole, but mine is a little bit snug. I'm not sure if it's because there's Cerakote on mine. This might work better on the factory one. Either case, this pin does not come out very hard. So we're just going to put our punch like so on that roll pin. And this is under spring tension, so we're going to knock the pin completely out, or we're not going to remove our punch immediately, okay? So we're just going to drift that out like that. You can see my punch is all the way through it. My pin's right there. And then I'm going to place my finger on this side. You can see the springs pushing it out. You can see it's spring loaded. I'm going to remove my punch and then just slowly remove the tension. And then we can remove our extractor. So the extractor kind of has to come a little bit forward and then off. And then there's two other pieces inside here that we do not want to lose. So here's our extractor. You can actually see that's the old style. And then we have our little spring. And that little itty bitty buffer, or insert they call it, that goes inside the spring. So don't lose any of those parts, okay? So now we're going to reassemble the extractor, and the easiest way to go about doing this is to insert your pin first, partially. So I have my little roll pin here, and it's recommended to actually replace this if you remove it. So I'm going to install mine in through the top here. I'm just going to get it started. And then make sure it is not inside this groove here, okay? Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little buffer and my spring. I'm going to put the buffer inside the spring. Sometimes a little grease will help keep that buffer in there so it doesn't fall out on you. We're going to hold our slide like this and then just drop our spring right down into the back cavity of that groove. Okay. Now we're going to take our extractor, kind of hooks around from the front like this. So we're going to put the front part in it first, push it with our finger back, and you can tell it's kind of lined up when you see this swoosh lines up. If you're too far back or too far forward, you can tell. Okay. So I'm going to push that in, pull it back as I'm pushing in, and kind of hold it as flat as I can against the slide while I drive this pin further in. And this is where the nylon comes in nice. If you got a Cerakoted slide, this is Cerakoted. You ain't scratching up your stuff. So I have it just about all the way in. I'm going to make sure it's countersunk just a little bit. That way my optics plate or my RDS, when I put that on there, it'll be flush. So it's perfectly flush up here. And then we want to make sure underneath here, where you can see the other end of it, it is not protruding past or into this groove. Okay, that's where your FCU, the rails on your FCU ride inside here. You don't want any obstructions in there. So there you go. As easy as that to remove and install the extractor. Let's move on. As you can see, I've reinstalled my optic plate and I've torqued the screws to the proper specification. Make sure you check out the manufacturer's website and find out what those specifications are if you have an RDS or an optic plate. So I have two different slides here. We're going to remove the striker assembly next. There are two different versions of the striker assembly, the old original version and then the new updated design. So we're going to go over that right now. In this one here, I have the original design. Okay, and this is our back plate. We're going to be removing that so we can get our striker to slide out the back of the pistol and remove our striker. So in the original design, the striker housing has this little nub or detent or plunger or whatever you want to call it on the back. There is a little groove in the front and there's a space behind it. So the way this one's designed is we're going to take our flat tip screwdriver, we're going to put it in behind that detent, pull that detent forward, and that will allow us to remove our back plate. So let's do that right now. I'm going to stick my screwdriver right in behind it, right here. You can see it's spring loaded. So I'm going to pull that forward and use my finger right here to slide up on my back plate. That unlocked it. And I'll just put one finger over the end here and slide that back plate off. And then to reassemble this style, once you're all done taking it apart, we're just going to, this is the housing, how it's kind of spring loaded. You can see the groove on the sides here. That's what our back plate goes into, so we need to make sure this housing goes in past those grooves so we can get our back plate into those grooves and get it pushed up in there. So I'm going to use my finger, I'm going to push in on my striker housing. I'm going to get my back plate started just like that. And then click it right into place. Okay. So that is the old original style housing. Let's move on to the newer version. I have this one disassembled, which I will reassemble and show you how to take it apart, but I think it's easier to understand how to take something apart if you know how it works. So on this striker housing here, we have this lever portion here. This is the same as the detent in the other one. Okay. The only difference is on this one, we have to push that in towards the center and then get our screwdriver in behind it and pull it forward into this channel right here. Okay. And that'll allow that striker to go in far enough to remove our back plate. So let me reassemble this and then I'll show you how to take it apart. All right, so I've reassembled mine, and this is the little lever for the striker housing that we're talking about. Yours might be a little bit more off to the right. Mine's pretty worn out, so it's kind of going into the left. That's why I don't use this one anymore, the striker housing. Anyway, so we're going to use our flat tip screwdriver to push that lever in into the center. Just like that. And then at the same time, you're going to have to get creative and kind of roll your screwdriver around the back of it and then pull it into this channel here. Okay. This might be hard to see, but I'll try to do it on camera. So we're going to push that off to the side. We're going to get in behind it. We're going to pull it forward. And then you want to have your finger ready on the back plate, pulling up on it. So that way when it does go forward enough, you can slowly work your back plate up. Okay, so as I'm rolling that in and then rolling behind it and then using the screwdriver against the back plate kind of as a wedge or a cantilever, I'm kind of prying it forward as I'm pushing with my finger up to get that back plate off. And then again, we're going to cover that up as we remove our back plate. And then to reassemble this, very easy, very, very easy. You don't have to sit there and try to push that in and pull that down and all that stuff. That's probably what you're going to end up doing. But this way here, you can use your back plate. You basically put your back plate on your lever, which is right here. You use your back plate to pull that in towards the center. And then you kind of roll your back plate up and over it and push that down and then slide it right into the grooves there. So once you figure out the technique, it's actually pretty slick. So I'm using the back plate, the side of it, to push that in, roll it around, click it up in there. That takes a little bit of practice, but so this is just a spare slide. We don't have the striker safety in it, so I was just demonstrating the newer style housing there and how to remove that striker. So let's get this one here taken apart and then we'll move on. All right, so we'll grab our screwdriver, old style, pull that in, remove our back plate, just like that. Okay, so now you have your back plate off. Your striker is not going to come out all the way by itself because of our striker safety, which is right here. And that is a spring-loaded part, as you can see. And that is what prevents the striker from contacting the primer without the trigger pulled. When you pull your trigger, a little arm, your safety, the safety lever inside your grip module here, this part right here that kind of gets stuck up sometimes. When you pull your trigger, it moves that up. It contacts the striker safety here. It pushes it in, and then it allows the striker, if You can see on the breech face here, it allows the striker to contact the primer. Okay. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to press that in, and we can remove our striker right from the rear. Then just release that really slowly, as there's a pretty long spring on the end of it. And there's your striker. So you can see this is the old style housing. More simple style. I actually prefer this style, but people were having problems with the back plate coming off while they were shooting. So they redesigned it so it didn't come off as easy. So that's our old striker. This is usually serviced as a complete assembly. You can take this apart. You collapse the spring, take the cups off, take the spring off. There's a little spring in behind there. Actually, let's do it really quick. So I told you we're going to take every part and piece apart. So there's our little cups that retain the spring. We're going to release the tension from our spring. It's pretty long. That's how that comes off. And then there's a little spring, which some people might lose it. It's hard to even see it sometimes. There's our housing, the old style housing. And then there's this little itty bitty spring right here. It gets caught on your striker, so sometimes, look, you can't even see it's there. So if you got the old style striker and you want to update to the new style striker, whatever the case may be, that's how you remove just the striker itself. So this here is serviced as an assembly. When you get it in a bag, it's all put together. There's really no need to actually take this all apart. If you do take it apart, just make sure you don't lose anything, and make sure it's completely bone dry when you go to put this back together, okay? So the hardest part about putting this together is you kind of need like 3 hands, but I've completely collapsed that spring, pinching the heck out of it. And then there's a little, you can see it's not as thick. This part here, this is a lot thinner. That's the part the cups go in. And then your cups, the edge that sticks out goes towards the tip of it. So we're going to put them both like that. Fingers are getting tired. Oops. There goes one of those cups. So we're going to squeeze those cups together around the striker. I'm going to release our spring. And then our spring is going to capture, the cups are going to go inside the spring. The spring's going to go up around it, okay? And it's going to try to force it out of that narrower channel, but it's not going to be able to, okay? And that's how you completely disassemble and reassemble the striker. Okay, so like I said, there's really no need to ever really disassemble this whole thing. When you buy a new one, it comes all complete and everything. So, but if you're the type that likes to take things apart and complete them completely, no problems at all. Just make sure that's bone dry like we talked about. So we have another 2 parts in here. We have our striker safety and the spring. So we're going to pull that out to the side just like that. Just like a mag release, pretty much. We got a little spring there and our striker safety. So once we have that stuff all apart, do whatever you want to clean out the striker channel here. Just remember in the very end, it's got to be absolutely, positively 100% dry. You can put oil in there right now, a bore brush, move it all around, break all that stuff up. Over time, stuff gets in through the striker hole here in the end. Assembly lube, whatever the case may be. Clean it all out, run some patches in there, a bunch of Q-tips in there, get it all nice and bone dry, okay? So next we'll reassemble the striker and move on. This next part to me is very tricky. It's like one of the easiest steps, but for some reason I have a difficult time getting this back in there. So you can see our spring goes on this little striker safety, and it's kind of raised up. And that raised up portion is what catches on, from me, on the side of the hole here trying to reinstall it. So it's one of those things, either it just drops right in or you got to sit there and mess with it for a little while. So I'm holding the slide on its side. I'm holding this like this. I'm going to put it in the hole. It needs to be up against the side so it can fit into the recessed bottom portion inside the slide, okay? And again, you don't have to hammer, beat, bang, force, press. It should slide right in. And I'll use this as an example. Mine isn't going straight in. It's a little bit off. So if you look in the hole there, see in the upper right hand, this corner up here, you can see how it's not far enough against this wall going straight into that cavity. It's wanting to go into the striker channel. Okay. So just pull it out a little bit, straighten it out, push it in. So now it is flush up here with my finger, and when you look in the hole there, it's a completely solid hole. When I release it a little bit, you can see how it drops down inside there because there's a cutout in the side of it. You want to make sure it's all the way like that. So we can install our striker, just like that. And once that's in, you ain't got to worry about that coming out. And then we'll install our back plate. Alright, so now I'm just going to install my back plate on the old style. It's a lot easier. You just push in on the housing like that. So I can get my back plate started in the grooves. Just like that. And then slide it up. As I slide it up, it'll click in place, which is locking it in place. Just like that. Little function check, make sure it doesn't come down. And you're good to go. Let's move on to sights. I got the Wheeler sight pusher here. I'm going to use a spare slide. My other sights are where I want them, so I don't want to remove them and reinstall them. So I did install a rear sight to this slide, so we'll use this as demonstration purposes. So a couple things. I'm a huge fan in buy once, cry once. Okay, and what I mean by that is there are cheaper sight pushers out there, but you're not going to be happy with them. Okay, I thought I'd use this probably 3 or 4 times. I've probably used it at least 30 times in the last 2 years. Okay, I use it all the time, and it is super slick and simple. So a couple things with sights. So say your sights are off. You shoot, they're off. Your buddy shot it, your wife, girlfriend, brother, husband, father, mother, whoever, and it's off for them as well. So your sights legitimately need to be adjusted. It is much easier and makes more sense to make your adjustment to your rear sight. Okay, so what I mean by that is if we look at this one with 2 sights on there, your rear sight is a solid chunk of metal. The dovetail is made to the sight all one piece. If we look at our front sight, it is actually like a blade that is made to a plate that slides into the dovetail. So it's not as robust as our rear sight, and depending on how hard that is stuck in there, if you're pushing on that blade, which you push on when you use a sight pusher, it could bend it, deform it, twist it, whatever the case may be. So if you look at your sight and it is relatively centered, make the adjustment to your rear. Okay? It makes much more sense. So with sights, I've always been under the understanding that they have to come off from right to left, and they go on from left to right. They do go on from left to right, but the way you take them off, you can go either way you want. You can go that way or you can go that way. Your dovetail is perfectly parallel. This side over here is the exact same side as the side over here. So by pushing your sight, continuing, even if it went on this way, if you continue that way straight through, it's not going to ruin the sight, it's not going to ruin the slide. The reason why you install a sight from this side here is because there's a slight taper usually on this side of the dovetail on our sight. So it makes it a lot easier to get it started. Okay, so installing them, yes, always from left to right. Removing them, you can go left to right, doesn't matter. Okay. As far as sight numbers, 6 and 8, pretty much the most common ones on your 365. And just look around on your sight. It's either usually here on this side, usually here, could be on top, could be on the side of the rear sights, wherever the case may be. So this part doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but when you go from like a 6 to an 8 on your front sight, it's going to move your point of impact 1 inch. Okay. If you go from a 6 to an 8 on your rear sight, it's going to move the point of impact 2 inches. So that part I really don't get, but it is what it is. When you are moving your sights to make adjustments, say you're shooting off to the left, so you need your point of impact to go to the right, the front sight, you move it in the opposite direction. The rear sight, you move it in the same direction. So if I need to move my point of impact to the right, I'm going to move my front sight to the left. On my rear sight, if I need to move my point of impact to the right, I'm going to move my rear sight to the right. So it's much easier and makes a lot more sense to use your rear sight when changing or adjusting or doing whatever you're doing to your sights. Okay. So let's move on to removing this sight real quick. Rear dovetail sight, wheeler pusher. I'm going to sit my slide in there just like that. There is a front and a back. This is the front part. This is the working side of the puller, as this part here goes on the front. And that cutout is for if your barrel has that part dipping down, it can go inside there. Okay. So I'm going to install my slide just like that. And I bought a sheet of Delrin. I cut 3 pieces off of it. That way I can protect my slide from the sight pusher. I'll put one on each side. Most of my slides are Cerakoted, so I don't want to mar them up. So sides in the front with the Delrin. And then on my tool, it's designed to go like this around your slide. And I think this might even be Delrin. I'm not sure, but it's got sharp edges on it. And whatever the case is, I don't want them pressing on my slide. So I actually put mine to the side like that. And install it just like this. Okay. So I'm not tightening anything down yet. I'm kind of just adjusting everything and getting it somewhat where it needs to be. And I've already adjusted this screw here. This screw here, if you tighten it or loosen it, it's going to move this whole thing up and down. That circle piece that's sitting on my slide, that's got a jacking screw on it. So it's going to move this up or down. And I'll show you what's important about that in a second. So I kind of have these on there, snugged up a little bit, back them off. What I want is my sight right in the middle of this piece on the bottom. Okay, right in the middle. I don't want it sticking in here. I don't want it sticking out here. I don't want it half on, half off. I want it right in the center, which it is. So my slide this way is perfect. I'm going to tighten up these 2 screws here firmly. And then these are already backed off. So I'm going to tighten this one until it just makes contact with my slide. Tighten that one until it just makes contact. And then squeeze them together. That's going to prevent me from having my slide crooked in here. Okay. And then we're going to tighten this down just a little bit so I can lift this up. And the height here is going to determine how close this edge is to your slide. Like right now, it's going to go right above the slide. If you're too low, it's going to run into it and it's going to scratch it and all that stuff. Okay. So where we need to be, and like I said, this can go off either direction. I'm just going to go off the way that I put it on. So I'm going to start turning this jacking screw. I'm going to work that sight off. Now, yours might be pretty hard. They are designed to be hard. It's a dovetail press fit. It should not be easy. If it's easy, then you actually have a problem. So if you're turning this and you cannot get that to move, I have no problems with taking my nylon tip and giving it a little smack. Sometimes there's Loctite in there, and that'll break that bond. Okay. So I'm just going to continue to keep turning this. Every now and then we're going to stop. We're going to check to make sure that we're not running into our slide. The sight is actually moving. We're not crushing something and destroying something, which it is. You can see my sight's moving. Okay. I'm going to continue to keep turning it. Again, double checking to make sure we're not hitting our slide, which we're not. You can see the gap in between there. Sight is almost off. It's going to get really easy towards the end, just like that. Hit let go. Pull my sight right out of there. A couple things while we have this right here and we're looking at it. Night sights, tritium vials, whatever the case may be, a lot of times those are epoxied or whatever into the sight itself. Some kind of material holding that in there. Okay. Ultrasonic cleaner, not a huge fan at all. I've tried it, did reviews on it for cleaning purposes. It really didn't do that good of a job at all. I can do a much better job disassembling everything, cleaning it with a rag, solvent, put it all back together, lube it up. Way better job than a ultrasonic cleaner. Anyway, some of the detergents and chemicals that are used with ultrasonic cleaners will degrade that epoxy or whatever is holding our tritium vials or whatever the case may be on your sights in there, and it can actually fall out. So wouldn't you recommend putting your night sights and stuff? I mean, I'm sure people have done it. I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time. It's just kind of a warning. Beware. It could happen. Okay. So we have our sight completely off. Next we would just remove our slide from the wheeler. And then if we're using our same slide, we're going to clean up our dovetail really nice and clean, both of them. And if our sight came off pretty easy, maybe we're, for whatever reason, we need to take our sights off and reinstall the same sights. Make sure it's nice and clean. Maybe put some red Loctite in there. Put your sight back on. That way when it hardens up, it'll keep it from moving as well. One thing I did not mention before we even move slides is it's a good idea to take a pencil, and I'm not going to mark on mine, but take a pencil and put a line right here at the edge of your sight, both sides, front and rear, whatever ones you're moving. That way if you're making adjustments to your sights, rule of thumb is you really don't want to move it very much. If you move it so much that you can't see that pencil mark anymore, you're going to make a pretty huge difference on your target. So basically we want to move it in increments to where we can just barely see our pencil mark still. Take it, shoot it, see what it does. If you need to move it a little bit more, then make another mark and move it some more. Another good thing is if we're just replacing sights and we're using the same slide and our sights were perfectly zeroed, we have reference marks when we reinstall our sights, marks that we can use to line everything back up. Okay, our dovetail is nice and cleaned. I've started my sight. It's in the dovetail. I gave it a little bit of a tap to get it started, and then I'm going to set this all back up in the wheeler. I need to move that so it clears my sight. Then I can let it down, making sure that this is straight still. And I'll put the washers on there. I'll put my nuts on there. And then I'm going to make sure that my slide is in far enough or out far enough, wherever the case may be. I'm going to tighten up these two here. These two here are backed off. I'm going to go until they just contact the slide, and then I'm going to tighten them together. Tighten down the tops. And there you go. Sights from the left to the right, installing. I'm going to start to work that in there like that. If it's binding up or you're having a real hard time getting it started, or your sight's actually starting to lift up because it don't want to go in the dovetail, then you got to figure out what's going on. If it's a new sight, you might have to remove a little bit of material. If it is going hard, again, it's going, but you're having a little hard time turning this. I don't have no problems with giving it a little bit of tap, and then it starts moving easy like that. Give it another little tap. Okay, but if you really got to work this to get that in there, you probably need to do a little bit more fitting on your sight itself. Okay, so if I mark my slide with pencil marks, I'm going to keep running this in until it's even with the pencil marks that I put on there. You can take a digital calipers, micrometer, whatever you want to call it, and find the center of my slide here, put a little pencil mark there, do the same thing on my sight. When those two pencil marks line up, I know I'm centered. So that right there, to me, eyeballing it, looks pretty close to center. Okay, so what I would do, if this wasn't a spare slide and I was actually going to shoot it afterwards, I would remove this, take this off, get my digital calipers, zero it, make sure it's together, and then this edge here, I would put one side up against my sight, the other edge aligned with a sharp edge or whatever on the slide, something that matches both sides. And then I'll transfer it over to here and then compare the two. So right there it looks pretty good. If I was going to shoot this, I might move this just a tick to the left. But that's pretty close. So if I needed to move it, I just put this back on there, move it a little bit, take it off, remeasure it, see if I'm close. And that's it. That is basically how you remove and install your sights on your pistol. Side note really quick, you don't want to make the investment into a sight pusher. That's fine. You don't need all these tools like I explained in the beginning. When you get Dawson sights or some other sights, they do come with tools like this to help you install and remove them. Either brass or aluminum or whatever this is made of. It's a softer metal and a hammer. you're basically going to use a soft jaw vise, preferably, to put this in there to hold it, and then you just hammer on and off those sights accordingly, okay? If you don't have a soft jaw vise, painter's tape, wrap the heck out of this slide, put it in there, tighten it up in your vise. You don't have to crank it down like super tight, just enough to hold it. And then if it starts moving as you're working it, tighten it up a little bit more. You know, you don't want to over tighten it in the very beginning. Also, if you're going to be into customizing your pistols and everything, you're really going to want a sight pusher. And if you're not going to do the customizing yourself, you're going to send it out to somebody to Cerakote or whatever, well, guess what? They got to remove the sights. They got to strip all this stuff down. They got to get it to a naked slide so they can do their work and put it in the oven. What I try to do for those guys is take the time to remove everything for them. Keep that stuff right here. That way, for one, it doesn't get lost. And two, I really enjoy putting it back together, seeing it come together, rather than open up in a box and it's already done. Boom, all right there for me. So again, if you're going to be into customizing, it makes total sense to invest in a sight pusher. So anyway, my sights are where they need to be. Now I'm just going to reassemble. Everything's all cleaned up. Basically, I put a little bit of grease on the hood here and on this side of the barrel itself. Your barrel contacts your slide where it comes through here. And then it also contacts here. So I put some grease there as well. And then reassemble. And my cleaning video on the 365 does a little bit more detail on this cleaning stuff. So that's not really the intent of this video. Recoil spring assembly, basically clean that and wipe it down. Lightly oil it. Put that back in, just like that. All right, finally, the part we've probably all been waiting for, the fire control unit disassembly. So the first thing we need to do is remove our fire control unit from our grip module. We have our retaining pin right here. So this pin typically can go either way, in or out, but I prefer going from the right to the left, and I'll show you why in a second. Sometimes these pins, you can just use your pin removal tool and just push that in there. Sometimes some come a little harder than others. It just depends on how many times you've had it out of your grip module, okay? If it's moving really hard because it's like a brand new pistol or whatever, you can use a traditional punch and a hammer. Get that on there, tap that through, okay? So on our pin, there is two different styles. This is the newer style. It looks more like a nail head here where it's tapered. The older style was pretty much the same all the way to the end with a little bit of a chamfer around the edge. But on our pin, we have a groove here, and that's what locks it in place. And we have one on the other side here. When I take the FCU out, you'll see a little retaining clip that actually goes into that groove. So if we're pushing that pin from this side out to the other side, you'll see how that retaining pin is removed from your FCU. You basically rotate it out this way and pull it out of the hole. Pushing the pin that way can unintentionally rotate that, and you might lose it. Not only that, but you're making two of these grooves go through that retaining pin or clip rather than just one, okay? So we're going to pull it out this side here, and as you can see, it's got a groove on both sides, okay? So we'll set that over here, and then we're just going to grab it by the rear here, pull it up out of the grip module, pull it up and out. If we flip it over, we will see our that little clip we were talking about right here. Right there. So you can see the straight portion here goes through the bottom of the hole inside, and that's what clicks into the pin, the grooves on it. So while we're here, we're going to actually remove that. It's usually the last step, but while we're on the subject, and all you do is you get your pick in here and kind of unhook it from the top. Just kind of get underneath it and roll it up and out. And then we're going to pull it or let it fall straight out the hole. Okay. So you can see one edge is a little bit flat towards me, and then it loops up and around. So when you install that, it goes just like that. Okay. Do not lose. Okay, so if you talk to many people that work on SIGs, I think it's pretty much an agreement that this is probably the most difficult to completely disassemble and reassemble, okay? Very awesome idea, the way they design this stuff, how one part holds in another part holds in another part, and it kind of walks its way around the frame. To the best of my ability, I'll try to describe what each part does and how it works with the pistol. That way you have a little better of understanding of how your pistol functions. A monkey can take things apart and put it back together, understanding how they work and all that stuff. Just the next level that we want to get to. So we have our takedown lever. We have our slide release or slide catch. Keyboard warriors, chill out. Many different terms for the same part. We're all talking about the same thing, okay? So we got a takedown lever and our takedown safety lever. Okay, so the job of this guy here is not to allow you to rotate the takedown lever with a magazine installed. So you'll see on the inside here, first of all, we got to go up on our mag release and start rotating that around. You can see this end of it right here, how that portion is starting to go into our mag well, right there. If there's a magazine in there, it's going to prevent me from rotating this takedown lever, okay? Also, if you watch our Sear, which is this silver part in the back here, when we go to rotate our takedown lever, you see it drops the Sear, okay? That's going to ensure that the striker is not energized while we're disassembling this, because if that Sear is dropped down inside there, the striker cannot be caught on it, which means it's going to be in the de-energized position, okay? So the first thing we're going to do on this is our trigger bar. So our trigger bar here is on the other side, basically looks the same. We have our trigger pulling on our trigger bar, okay, which does the same thing on this end. It pulls our Sear down and releases our striker, okay? So we're going to unhook our trigger bar first so we can move it out of the way. This is our disconnector right here, this silver piece. We need to move that out of the way to push this first pin out, okay? So the easiest way that I do, or I use, is I use a 90-degree pick. If you stab yourself and have to go to the hospital, just right now, it's not my fault, okay? No liability. Do this at your own risk. I used to use needle nose pliers. Our trigger bar spring on one end is hooked through the trigger bar. See that? It's hooked right here. And then it goes, it's like a V. It goes this way, coils, and then goes through this part here and hooks right on the edge, right here. So old school people with 365s, when we had the dead trigger issues and the trigger bar springs unhooking, it's because this portion, one leg of the trigger bar spring was too long. It was protruding into our mag well cavity here. So it was actually scratching up your magazines. And then what happened to some people is when you installed a magazine, it actually disconnected the trigger bar spring from the frame here. And then your trigger didn't work unless you held the pistol upside down, and then it would shoot, like gangster style. Anyway, so this is going to be a long video, but I want to thoroughly explain all this stuff because I don't want to do a bunch of videos. I want to do the 365 once, everything you need to know, and then we can move on with our lives. So I'm just going to put this down on the table here. When you go to unhook your trigger bar spring, it's going to want to push the trigger bar to the rear, which makes it harder to remove because now you got to move the spring even further this way and you can only go so far. So what I do is I put my palm, the heel of my palm here against my trigger, the backside, as I'm holding this, and that keeps the trigger bar pushed that way as far as possible. So we'll get in here. I'm going to capture that spring with my finger too because I don't want it taken off if your pick or whatever you're using slips off, okay? So I just disconnected it from the hole, okay? And then it should fall right out. So there is your trigger bar spring. It's the same on both sides. It can go in either way. So our trigger bar is kind of floating around. The next thing we're going to do is remove our disconnector. The reason why we got to remove the disconnector is because one part holds another part type deal. There's two holes behind here, one of them being for our safety lever pivot pin. We need to remove that. This really, it's like a nail. It's got a really funky head on it though. This one here, we need to remove that. And also with this part, you can see the top part of it is actually capturing the sear pivot pin. And the reason why we got to remove this is because it's capturing our takedown safety lever. So again, one part holds another part, holds another part. Very good design. So to go over our disconnector really quick so we understand what it does. In our slide, we have a notch right here, right in the side. In that notch, this disconnector fits perfectly because our slide, the rail here, goes right on here. So with our slide on there, what this guy does here, it prevents you from being able to fire your pistol if it's not locked up or in battery. So with everything ready to go, working properly, that's how it's positioned. But if our slide is not locked all the way to the front, this little disconnector is not in that slot in your slide. The slide is actually making it go like that. It's pushing it down, which is dropping your trigger bar, which now, when I pull my trigger, it's not even touching the sear at all. Okay? So it won't pull on the sear to disengage the striker to allow the pistol to fire. So that's another safety inside here. Okay? That's your disconnector. When everything's locked up, you can see how that moved up. It's inside the groove inside the slide, and now drops the sear. Okay? So that's the way that works. So if it hasn't fallen out already, it just drops out of there. If it did fall out, no big deal. It only goes in one way, so you didn't need to pay attention to how it was in there. So now we have two holes here and behind it. We have this small bottom hole. That is what our safety lever pivots on. And that's the pin we're removing now. And the top bigger hole is our sear pivot pin, which holds the sear and the sear spring, which we don't want to remove yet. Okay? So we're just going to push this pin all the way through to the other side, and your trigger or your takedown safety lever may or may not fall off. If you're holding it, it's not going to fall off. If you are, it might. So we're going to push that all the way out, and that's that weird looking safety lever pivot pin. I'm going to put that to the side. When we pull out our punch, our safety lever is going to fall out because right now it's acting as the pin, just like that. And many of you that have done a trigger job, this little guy fell out on accident for you, which I have a video showing you how to just reinstall that. So we're going to put that to the side. We're going to flip it over here, and now we can just remove our takedown safety lever. This only goes in one way. We got this hooked end on the front here. This one hooks around as well. So this is the part that prevents your magazine, or prevents your lever from being turned, your takedown lever, because it hits the magazine right here. And then this is the part that pulls on the sear. Disengages it. Okay? It's takedown safety lever. And then our takedown lever itself, we're just going to, nothing's holding it anymore, so we can rotate it all around. About 7 o'clock position, and you can pull it straight up and out of there. Okay? Before we move on, I just want to show you really quick that the hole that we just took that pin out of right here, I can see right through it from one side to the other. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because your sear spring right here, one leg of it goes underneath your sear, and the other end is actually on a shelf right now inside the frame. Normally, it could be that the little end of the spring, you can see it visible inside this hole. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because when we reassemble it, if all is good in the world, the procedure that I show you, when you put a punch in here before we put the pin in, it's going to move that spring in and put it up on that shelf so it's not in the hole at all, and we can slide our pin right through there nice and easy. Not everybody's going to have it that easy. You're going to probably have to come in through this side, the other side here, and you're going to have to hold that spring up and out of the way while you push your pin in through this side. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that typically that spring, it can be, and it's not going to hurt anything if it's on, you know, the pressure of it's on that spring the whole time. It doesn't matter if it is, but typically it's up on a shelf inside the grip module, or excuse me, the frame. Okay. Sorry, my throat's so dry. These videos take a real long time and there's a lot of talking. So my next step right now is I'm going to remove my trigger bar and my trigger and the trigger pivot pin. Okay. So again, one thing captures another thing, captures another thing. The reason why you have to take it down this far to remove, just to do a trigger, is because the pin that holds it only comes out one way. I can't just, because you can see this with everything put together, you cannot push the pin through that way, because guess what? The takedown safety lever was in the way. So this is the end of our trigger pivot pin right here. So you get your small punch, wherever that went, right here. And then I'm going to put it in through my trigger hole here. And we're going to push the trigger pivot pin out just like that. Then we can pull that right out. So the reason why we got to take that pin out first before we remove our trigger bar is because there has to be a lot of slop in this in order to get that trigger bar unhooked from our trigger. So your trigger bar, it's probably just floating all around. The easiest way to do this is rotate your trigger a little bit forward, and you can pull this up and out through the back. Okay, there's a little bit more room up here. With your trigger in like this, you cannot get it off of the little post on the back side of your trigger here. So there's our trigger bar. Okay, nothing to it. And then sometimes these fall in and out, and sometimes you got to keep monkeying around with it. Usually you go forward a little bit and then it'll come out. And there's our trigger. Obviously the Armory Craft trigger. There's a little post on the back side that our trigger bar hooks onto. Just like this. Okay. So we'll set that aside and we'll move on to the Sear and the Sear Spring. Alright, so this next part is what most people consider to be the most difficult part of not the disassembly, but the reassembly of the 365. So on our Sear, this is all we have left. Oh, actually, let's do this first. Our magazine catch and release. So there's this little spring underneath it that kind of goes up over it, and it's like on a wedge, claw, hook type dealio. So the easiest way to get this out is to undo this end first that it pivots on. You can just pull this out by hand. I'm just using the punch to show you as I'm doing it a little easier. So just lift up on that back side, kind of move it around, and then pull it out. That's that little weird claw hook right here. And on the top part, it's just a little groove in the top right here. That's what the spring goes right in there. Okay, so we'll take that off. We can even take our little spring out. Just be careful because some of these things do go flying across the room. It's on a little post. This little post here. And the other end comes straight down and it's captured in a little valley. Okay, so basically you got to get it off the post and then just pull it out. Sometimes they fall out. Sometimes you got to move them around a little bit. Just like that. There's our little spring. Alright, so now we'll do our Sear. I just want to make sure every single part and piece is taken care of and removed. That way people can't say you didn't take it all apart. So our Sear and our Sear spring and our pin that it pivots on, all we're going to do is push this pin out. Stuff's going to fall out. That's it. Okay. I basically kind of keep my finger over the top of it here. It doesn't have a whole lot of spring tension, but just in case, we don't want to lose anything. And then we're going to push it from this side out the other side. It only goes one way. Okay. So this is our takedown lever side. This is the trigger bar side with the disconnector. We're going to push it from this side out to the other side. So I'm going to put my finger over there, hold it next to my desk so nothing goes rolling around, flying out. And through the top hole here, the bigger hole here, just going to push that pin out. There's our pin. As you can see, it looks like a little nail. It only goes one way. And then there's our sear and our sear spring. Old style and new style sear. I don't know why they made a change to this, but I believe mine is the old style. I'll look real quick and I'll get the answer when we reassemble. But I noticed it had this part here on the back. That was the visual difference. I know the way the spring hooks into it's a little bit different on the other version, but it's kind of irrelevant. They all do the same thing, and I'm not even sure why they changed it up. So there's our sear, and there's our sear spring. So on our sear spring, this hooked part hooks onto the sear, and then as it's installed in the pistol like we were looking at it before, this is how it's in there. A lot of you will see this little leg in we're all going to see it initially when we reinstall it in through the bottom hole, the safety lever pin hole. When we install this, we're going to see that in the little hole. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our punch, we're going to get it underneath the spring, not the top. And we're going to push our punch into the hole, and then the wedge design of our punch as it goes in the hole is going to push up on that spring at the end here. And with any luck, you might even hear a little click, but it's going to jump up onto that little ledge inside the frame, and then it's going to be much easier for you to put back together. So let me get all this cleaned up. That's what I'd recommend at this time. Now's the time I basically did mine yesterday. I completely soaked this with gun cleaner, scrubbed it all down with my nylon brush. I even brought it to the sink, completely washed it off with water. Some people might disagree with that, whatever the case may be. The reason I don't have a problem with it is because then I came back, I blew it off with air afterwards. So I get all the little nooks and crannies. My Q-tips, I had them in every single little nook and cranny, okay? And then I completely soaked this whole thing in oil, and can I use my brush again to wipe it all down and make sure that oil was everywhere. Cleaned it off with my rag, my t-shirt. And then I blew it off with compressed air again, because you don't want to over lubricate things. The rule of thumb being, you put oil or lube or whatever on there, you can see that it is lubricated, you can feel that it is lubricated, but by gravity it's not moving or dripping or whatever the case may be. Okay, that's as much lubrication as you need if you're going to use lube on whatever part it is. So anyway, I coated the whole thing with oil, blew it all off with air, wiped it all down, again Q-tips everywhere until it was nice and completely clean and dry. And then not in this video, but my cleaning video, you'll see where I applied grease and oil and whatever for lubing it up. So at this time, totally clean every single piece and part. Take your time, because it takes a little while to get to this point. Take that extra time to clean it all up, and then I'll make a second video on how to completely reinstall the P365.